There's a straw hat that's been passed down 3 times now. Goldie Roger wore it, then a red-haired bloke named Shanks, then a kid, and the whole enormous story of one piece every island, every crew, every impossible dream sort of balances on small moments involving that hat and a handful of people who made one choice instead of another. Tonight we're going to wander through 10 of those moments, 10 little forks in the current. Each one grows out of a real event from the series. Something Oda actually put on the page and then quietly wonders what would have happened if it had tipped the other way. There's nothing here you need to keep your eyes open for. Let it play in the background and drift off whenever you like. If you nod off somewhere around the 3rd or 4th one, no harm done. None of these little what-ifs are in any hurry. They'll keep till morning, or till next time, or forever. That's the gentle thing about them. They ask nothing of you at all. If you like this sort of thing, a subscribe helps more than you'd think. But no pressure. Get comfortable. We'll start where the whole thing starts, more or less, with a man, a boy, and an arm. So it always comes back to the hat for me. Before Shanks was a man with red hair and a legend attached to him, before he was one of the 4 emperors ruling the back half of the sea, he was just a pirate who liked a particular little town called Fuchsia Village and kept dropping anchor there between voyages. And in that town, there was a loud, stubborn kid named Monkey D. Luffy, who wanted, more than anything, to be taken seriously by grown-up pirates, which is a very normal thing for a kid to want. It's the sit at the big table instinct. Most of us had some version of it. The trouble started the day Luffy, trying to prove he was tough, swallowed one of Shanks' treasures without knowing what it was. The Gomu Gomu no Mi, a devil fruit. And here's the deal with devil fruits. If you're new to all this, they give you a power, something strange and permanent, but they take something in return. From that moment on, you can't swim. The sea rejects you. You go in the water, you sink like a stone, and that's the whole tragic joke of it. The kid who wants to sail the ocean can now never fall into it. Luffy got a rubber body out of the bargain, which is genuinely useful later, but that day it just made everyone at the bar laugh. The real turning point comes a bit after. There's a mountain bandit named Higuma who humiliates Shanks in the bar, and Luffy, being Luffy, mouths off about it. So Higuma grabs him, drags him down to the water, and chucks him off a boat to drown him. And out of the deep comes the Lord of the Coast, one of those enormous sea kings, a monster the size of a building, and it goes for the kid. Shanks gets there just in time. He pulls Luffy out of the water, and when the Sea King lunges again, Shanks stops it with a single look. Doesn't even raise a weapon, just glares at the thing, and this creature that could swallow a ship whole decides it would very much like to be somewhere else. We learn much later, that's a rare kind of willpower, a pressure some people carry that can bend the will of others just by aiming it. Back then it just looked like magic, a man staring down a leviathan and winning. But it cost him. When the beast snapped, it took Shanks' left arm, and little Luffy, standing there sobbing, realises his hero has lost an arm because of him. Shanks just smiles about it, tells him it's only an arm, says the important thing is that the kid is alive, and that for me is the moment the whole story is planted. Because when Shanks leaves Fuchsia for good, he takes off his straw hat, the hat Roger gave him, the most precious thing he owns, and he puts it on Luffy's head, tells him to give it back once he's become a great pirate. It's a promise disguised as a hand-me-down. It's the entire series in one gesture. Now, what if he'd been half a second slower? Or what if he'd made the cold, sensible calculation that an arm is an arm, and he still had a crew to captain and a sea to sail, and he simply couldn't afford to lose it for one loud kid he'd known a few months? The first thing that vanishes is the hat. And I know that sounds small, but follow it. Without the hat, there's no promise. Without the promise, there's no North Star. Luffy in the actual story doesn't become a pirate because piracy's fun. He becomes one because a specific man he worshipped believed a specific thing about him and left behind a specific object. he had to earn the right to return. Take that away, and you've got a rubber kid in a fishing village with a grandfather, Garp, who is a marine hero and who wants nothing more than for Luffy to grow up and join the Navy. And Garp, bless him, is relentless. In the real timeline, the only thing that beat Garp's plan for Luffy was Luffy's own dream, and that dream had Shanks' fingerprints all over it. Without Shanks lighting that fire, I genuinely think Garp wins. Maybe not happily, and maybe not without a fight, but you can picture it, can't you? Luffy in a marine coat, strong as anything, because he'd still be strong, but pointed in completely the wrong direction. Rubber powers used to hunt pirates instead of become one. And the thing is, a story doesn't announce the people it loses. It just quietly never introduces them. No Straw Hat means no Straw Hat pirates, no crew that forms around that exact boy and that exact flag. Zoro's still out there somewhere, chasing his own promise. Nami's still trapped in her own corner of the sea. Usopp's still telling lies on a hill. They just never get collected. There's no one to come along and gather them, because the gatherer is off doing something else entirely. All those people who became a family only became a family because one loud kid walked into their lives and refused to leave. Remove the reason he ever left home, and they all just stay scattered, each one stuck in their own small tragedy, with no one arriving to pull them out of it. There's a lovely bit of trivia buried in this though. That hat isn't even really Shanks'. Roger wore it first, so when Shanks gives it away, he's passing along something that already carried the weight of the last king of the pirates. It's a relay. Roger to Shanks to Luffy, this quiet little baton handed down across generations, and each person who wears it seems to end up at the centre of everything. In the timeline where Shanks keeps his arm and keeps the hat, that baton just stops. He holds on to it. Maybe he gives it to someone else someday, someone we'd never care about. Or maybe he's still wearing it years later, an old emperor with a hat and no one to give it to, wondering vaguely about a kid in a village he used to visit. I don't think Shanks ever regretted the arm. That's the bit people miss. He didn't lose it in some grand battle. He lost it saving a nobody, and he laughed. That was the whole point of the man. He looked at a crying child and a monster and made an instant decision that a life was worth more than a limb, and everything good that followed in the entire series grew out of that one unglamorous, generous moment in shallow water. Take it away, and you don't get an explosion. You get a slow, spreading quiet. A sea full of people who never met the one person who would have believed in them. And a straw hat, sitting on the wrong head, going nowhere. But that's just the first road. Let's drift somewhere gentler. Somewhere with wooden swords and a staircase and two kids who thought they had all the time in the world. Picture a staircase in a dojo, ordinary wooden steps, worn smooth in the middle from years of feet. There's nothing dramatic about it. That's sort of the point. Before Roronoa Zoro was the swordsman who could cut through almost anything, he was a little kid at the Ishin Dojo in a village in the East Blue, and he was the second best student there, which drove him mad, because he was better than every adult in the place. He could beat grown men twice his size, but there was one person he could not beat, and it was a girl about his age, named Kuina. She was the dojo's strongest pupil, and she was properly good. Not good for a kid, just good. The two of them fought constantly, and every single time, she won. By the time they were 11, she'd beaten him something like 2,000 times, which is a number that sounds made up until you realise they were basically fighting every day for years. And it wasn't close. She'd take him apart over and over, and he kept coming back for more, which tells you everything you need to know about Zoro, even at that age. The part that always sat heavy with me was this. Kuina, despite winning every time, believed she was going to lose in the end. Not to Zoro, to biology. Her father had told her that girls couldn't become true master swordsmen, that once she grew up her body would stop keeping pace and the boys would overtake her. And she believed it. This girl, who was better than everyone in the room, had already decided The world had a ceiling built specifically for her. Zorro, who kept losing to her, thought that was nonsense and told her so. Said he'd beat her one day because he was more skilled, not because she was a girl, and that in the meantime, she'd better not slack off. So they made a promise. One of them would become the greatest swordsman in the world. A proper childhood pact, sworn between two kids who were absolutely certain they had decades to make it come true. The next day, Quina fell down the dojo stairs and died. That's it. No villain, no battle, no meaning to it. She just fell. And it's such a small, stupid, ordinary tragedy that it almost doesn't fit in a story this enormous, which I think is exactly why it lands so hard. The strongest kid in the dojo, undone by a staircase. Zorro was furious about it for years, and honestly, fair enough. There's a particular kind of grief that comes from losing the person you were trying to catch up to. The whole point of them was that they were ahead of you, and then suddenly they're just gone, and you're left running toward a spot where nobody's standing anymore. What Zorro did was ask for her sword, the Wado Ichimonji, a beautiful white blade her family kept, the one she'd used the last time she beat him. He asked her father if he could carry it, and from that day, the promise stopped being about beating her and started being about honouring her. When Zorro says he'll become the world's greatest swordsman, he's not being cocky. He's carrying two dreams in one body. He's living for a girl who never got her shot. Now, what if she'd just not fallen? What if she'd taken those stairs half a second differently, the way all of us have stumbled and caught ourselves 1,000 times without thinking about it? The first thing that changes is the weight of Zorro's whole ambition. In the real story, his goal is stitched to a funeral. It's grief with a blade attached. But if Quina lives, the promise stays a rivalry. Lighter, sharper, more of a competition than a memorial. He'd still want to be the best, but he'd want it the way you want to beat your annoying older sibling at something, not the way you want to make a dead friend's life mean something. That's a completely different fuel. I'm not sure it burns as hot. And then there's the sword. Zorro carries the Wado Ichimonji through the entire series. It becomes part of who he is, but it was hers. If she lives, she keeps it, obviously, and Zorro has to go find his own path to the top with his own blades, which he'd manage because he's Zorro, but that particular white sword, the one soaked in all that meaning, stays in the hands of the girl who was always meant to have it. There's a bit of lore here though, and it makes her death even sadder once you know it. Quina's family, the Shimotsuki line, traces back to Wano, this isolated country of master swordsmiths and samurai. Her grandfather was one of the greatest swordsmiths who ever lived. He forged the Wado Ichimonji with his own hands, and he also forged Enma, a blade that later turns up in Zorro's hands too, once belonging to one of the most legendary samurai in the whole world. So Quina wasn't just a talented kid. She was born into one of the most important sword bloodlines in the entire story, and nobody around her fully knew it yet. She had the pedigree, the skill, the blade, all of it, and a staircase took the lot. If she lives, that bloodline has a living heir who's actively chasing the top. Imagine her grown up. Imagine the two of them, Zorro and Quina, both out on the sea, both hunting the same title, occasionally crossing paths and picking up their old argument exactly where they left it. There's a version of this world where the greatest swordsman conversation isn't about a lonely bloke with 3 swords and a chip on his shoulder. It's about 2 old friends who spent their whole lives refusing to let the other one win. That's a lovely story, honestly. Sadder in some ways that we never got it, but I keep coming back to the smallness of it, because that's what makes Quina's What If different from most of the others we'll talk about tonight. Nobody chose this. There's no cruelty to undo, no enemy to outsmart, just an accident that didn't have to happen on a completely unremarkable set of stairs on the one morning after 2 kids finally understood each other. And every time Zoro raises that white sword for the rest of his life, she's the reason his hand doesn't shake. Which means, in a strange way, the accident that broke him is also the thing that steadied him. I don't have a neat bow for that. It's just true, and it's a bit much to think about at 1 a.m, so let's move on. Since we're on the subject of people who got taken too early, let's talk about a woman with a McCann Grove and 2 daughters who weren't hers by blood, and a choice she made that she absolutely did not have to make. There's a grove of mikan trees on a hill in a little place called Kokoyashi village. Mikans are these small sweet oranges, and the grove belonged to a woman named Belle-Mère, who was, by her own cheerful admission, a bit of a hooligan. She wasn't anyone's mother by blood. She'd been a Marine once, and during a battle she came across 2 little girls in the wreckage of a war, Nami and her older sister, Nojiko, both orphans, both with nowhere to go, and Belle-Mère, who had no money and no plan, and frankly no business adopting anyone, took one look at them and decided that was that. She left the Marines, she raised them on oranges and stubbornness in a house that was always a little too tight on cash, and it was not a perfect childhood, which is what I love about it. Belle-Mère wasn't a saint. She lost her temper. When money got really bad, she'd quietly eat nothing but the mekans off her own trees and tell the girls she was on a diet, so they wouldn't know how thin things had gotten. There's this one small detail that undoes me every time. She couldn't afford new clothes for Nami, so she took an old dress of Nojiko's and altered the sunflower on it into a little lion just to make it feel like Nami's own. That's the whole woman in one gesture. No money, endless love, making do. Nami, being a kid, didn't always see it. One day they had a proper row. Nami said something cruel, that Nojiko wasn't her real sister, since they weren't related by blood, and Belle-Mère slapped her for it, and Nami ran off shouting that she wished she'd been adopted by rich people instead. Completely normal, awful kid stuff. The sort of fight you'd forget about by dinner in any ordinary life. Except that same day, the fishman pirate Arlong and his crew rolled into the village and started collecting tribute. Pay to live, basically. His price was 100,000 berries for every adult, 50,000 for every child. And when they reached Belle-Mère's house, she had exactly 100,000 berries to her name. Enough for one adult, enough to save herself. Here's the choice. The villagers, thinking fast, tried to cover for her. They pretended Nami and Nojiko weren't hers, that she lived alone, so she could pay the single adult fee and survive. Arlong's crew had no record of the girls. It would have worked. All Belle-Mère had to do was stay quiet. Let the lie stand. Deny, just for a moment, that those 2 kids were hers. She wouldn't do it. She stepped forward and told Arlong the truth, that she had 2 daughters, and she spent the money on them instead of herself. And Arlong shot her right there in front of both girls. Her last words were an apology. She said sorry for not being able to give them everything they wanted, told them she loved them, and that was it. I want to sit with how deliberate that was because it's easy to miss. She didn't die because she was cornered. She died because she was offered a way out that required her to unlove her children for 30 seconds, and she looked at that deal and said no. She'd rather die a mother than live having pretended she wasn't one. Whether that was brave or reckless is an argument people genuinely have, and I go back and forth on it myself, but you can't call it anything other than pure. So, what if she'd taken the out? What if she'd looked at her 2 girls, done the cold arithmetic and thought, I can't protect them if I'm dead? So she stays quiet. She pays for herself. She lives. The most immediate thing that changes is Nami's entire life. Because in the real timeline, Belle-Mère's death is the thing that hands Nami over to Arlong. He finds out she can draw maps. She's a genuine prodigy at it, and he takes her, forces her to chart the seas for his conquest, and dangles a deal in front of her. Buy the whole village's freedom for 100 million berries, and he'll let everyone go. So Nami spends the next 8 years as a thief, stealing from pirates, hoarding every coin, hated by her own village, because they thought she'd sold out to the man who killed her mum. 8 years of pretending to be a villain to save the people who despised her for it. That's the Nami we meet at the start of the story. Guarded, money-obsessed, absolutely unwilling to trust anyone, because the last time she trusted the world, it shot her mother in the garden. Take Belmer's death away, and you take all of that away too. No enslavement, no 8 years of secret sacrifice, no deep bone-level distrust of every crew she meets. Nami grows up poor but whole, with a mum who's alive to be exasperated by her. And that's genuinely lovely to imagine. She deserved it. But here's the ache, and it's the same ache we bumped into with Kuina. The thing that broke Nami is also the thing that made her. That distrust, that hardness, that refusal to be anyone's fool, it's armour she forged in the worst possible fire. And it's part of what makes her so sharp and so capable later. A Nami raised soft is a happier Nami. I'm just not certain she's the one who becomes the navigator who can read a sky nobody else can read and steer a crew through storms that would kill anyone else. Some of that came from having nothing and clawing her way up anyway. And there's a quieter loss too, one that's got nothing to do with plot. In the real story, Belmer's death gives Nami something to be rescued from. When Luffy eventually turns up and takes Arlong apart and gives the village back its future, it's this huge cathartic release, years of grief finally answered. If Belmer lives, that whole moment never needs to happen. Which is good. Obviously it's good. Nobody should have to be rescued from a childhood like that. But it does mean Nami never gets that particular proof that someone would come for her, that she was worth fighting for. She'd just have to take it on faith, like the rest of us. I don't think there's a clean answer to which timeline is better. A living mother and a softer daughter, or a dead mother and a daughter forged into something extraordinary. Both are true at once, which is the whole cruelty of it. What I do know is that a woman with no money and 2 borrowed kids turned a sunflower into a lion, and then died rather than say those kids weren't hers, and I'm not sure the story ever gives us a purer act of love than that one. Even in the timeline where she lives, I'd want her to keep the grove. Let's rest here for a second before we carry on. There's nothing to do here. This is just a pause. We've been through a few of the heavier ones already, and there are more coming, so it's worth stopping to remember that none of it is real. Whatever's actually around you right now, the quiet, the dark, the weight of the blanket, that's the true thing. The what-ifs are just weather passing through. They can't follow you out of the room. When you're ready, we'll pick it back up. No rush at all. Trafalgar Law called him Korra-san. That's where I always start with this one, because that little nickname carries the whole thing. Before Law was the cool, unbothered surgeon pirate with a sword and a talent for cutting the world into pieces and rearranging it. He was a dying kid. He came from a place called Flevance, a town that was slowly poisoning everyone in it without knowing. A disease called amber lead syndrome, where your body very gradually turns to lead. White blotches on the skin, then worse, then dead. Law's whole family, his whole town, gone. And Law survived just long enough to become a furious, grief-poisoned little boy who fully expected to die and wanted to take as much of the world with him as he could on the way out. He fell in with the worst possible crowd for that mindset, the Don Quixote pirates, run by a genuine monster named Doflamingo. And then there's Corazon, real name Rocinante. He was Doflamingo's younger brother, which should make him a monster too, and everyone in the crew assumed he was one. This big clumsy bloke who never spoke and set himself on fire by accident roughly once a chapter. Comedy character on the surface, except none of it was real. Rocinante wasn't mute, he was working a soundproof devil fruit power, the ability to wrap silence around himself, and he was using it because he was actually an undercover marine, planted in his own brother's crew to bring it down from the inside. He'd built an entire fake self to survive in that place. What breaks the disguise is Law. Rocinante hears the kid's full name, understands where he's from, understands he's dying, and something in him just can't do the mission anymore. He recognized the specific loneliness of losing everyone, because he'd lost his family too. So he does something completely against his own interests. He kidnaps this angry, dying kid and takes him on a long, desperate tour of the sea, looking for anyone who can cure amber lead. Months of it. And doctor after doctor turns them away, some out of fear, because they think the disease is contagious. And Rocinante ends up losing his temper and burning hospitals down out of sheer helpless rage. There's this detail from the story that lives in my head rent-free. Rocinante would cry over Law at night, while the boy was asleep, so the kid wouldn't see him do it. That's the guy, the clown who cried in the dark so the child wouldn't have to carry his despair on top of his own. The cure, in the end, was a devil fruit. The Opa Ope no Mi, the Op fruit, which is this legendary thing that lets the user perform impossible surgeries, basically the powers of a surgeon god. It can cure any illness. It can even, if you use it a certain way, grant someone eternal life, but it kills the user to do it. That last part matters because Doflamingo wanted the fruit for exactly that reason. He was hunting it to make himself immortal. Rocinante got there first, stole it, and forced Law to eat it, curing the amber lead in one stroke and handing a scared child the most powerful medical ability in the world. And it cost him everything. Rocinante was exposed as a spy, sold out by another member of the crew, and Doflamingo cornered him. His own brother killed him, but even dying, Rocinante used his silence power one last time, wrapping it around Law, hiding him in a chest so the boy could slip out unnoticed while Doflamingo raged. The last thing he told Law was that he loved him. Then he was gone, and Law carried that man's memory into everything he built afterward, his crew, his flag, the whole shape of his life, all quietly designed to honour a clumsy spy who chose a dying stranger over his own survival. So, what if Kora-san never intervened? What if he stayed undercover, kept the mission, let the dying kid die the way the mission required? There's no Law, full stop. And once you pull that thread, an astonishing amount of the later story unravels, because Law turns out to be one of the most important pieces on the whole board. He grows up into a captain with a bounty and a plan, and crucially, he's the one who walks up to Luffy years later and proposes an alliance. Two rookie captains deciding to take down one of the great powers of the sea together. That alliance is the engine of an entire enormous stretch of the story. It's Law and Luffy working in tandem who bring down Doflamingo at Dressrosa. And it's that same partnership, expanded, that later takes on Kaido, one of the four emperors, one of the strongest creatures alive, in the war for Wano. None of that has an architect without Law, and here's the grim little loop of it. Without Law, Doflamingo is never stopped by that alliance, which means Doflamingo very possibly gets what he was reaching for. He keeps hunting the Op fruit. Maybe he gets it. Maybe he makes himself immortal, the exact nightmare Rocinante died to prevent. Rocinante's entire sacrifice existed to keep that fruit out of his brother's hands and put it somewhere it could do good instead. Remove Rocinante and the fruit's just sitting out there for the worst man in the region to collect at his leisure. But honestly, the plot's not even the saddest part for me. The saddest part is smaller. It's that in the timeline where Kora-san doesn't act, a little boy who was convinced the entire world was cruel and pointless dies still believing that. Because the thing Rocinante actually gave Law wasn't the surgery powers, it was proof. Proof that someone would throw their whole life away just to keep him alive. That the world contained at least one person who thought he was worth saving. Law spends the rest of the series being a fundamentally decent man underneath all the cool detachment, and he's decent because one person showed him decency at the exact moment he'd given up on it. Take that away and you don't just lose a great character, you lose the moment a broken kid learned he mattered. I think about how easy it would have been for Rocinante to do nothing. He had every reason to. The mission, his own safety, the sheer madness of adopting a dying child while spying on a murderer. Any sensible person walks away. He didn't, and an unspeakable amount of good flowed out of one clumsy man deciding that a stranger's life was worth more than his own plans. Right, let's move to someone who spent most of her life being certain she didn't deserve to be saved at all, and the day a crew disagreed with her loudly enough to change her mind. There's a flag coming down, a big banner with the world government's mark on it, hanging over a fortress on an island called Aina's Lobby, and a sniper on a distant rooftop puts a shot clean through it. And that single act, shooting down that flag, is one small crew formally declaring war on the most powerful organisation on the planet. Over one person, let me back up because the person is the whole point. Nico Robin joined the Straw Hats and spent a good while being the quiet, unreadable one. Older than the others, elegant, a bit unnerving, always slightly held back from the group. And there was a reason for the distance, which is that Robin had spent her entire life learning that getting close to people got them killed. She was the sole survivor of an island called O'Hara, a place full of scholars who studied history, specifically the parts of history the world government has forbidden anyone to study. There are these ancient, indestructible stones scattered across the world called poneglyphs, and carved into them is the truth about a lost century that the people in power have spent centuries burying. Robin can read them. She's one of the only people alive who can, which, to the government, makes her not a person, but a threat that has to be erased. They wiped O'Hara off the map to keep its knowledge buried, and Robin got out as a little girl and has been hunted ever since. So by the time she's sailing with the Straw Hats, she's carrying decades of a very specific lesson. Everyone who ever sheltered you eventually betrayed you or died for it. So don't let anyone in, and above all, don't let anyone risk themselves for you. And that lesson curdles into something quietly awful. She decides that the kindest thing she can do for her new friends is disappear. When the government's agents finally close in on her, she goes with them willingly. She lets herself be captured and marched toward execution, and she doesn't call for help, because in her head, letting the Straw Hats fight for her means getting them killed, and she'd rather die than be the reason another crew ends up in the ground. The Straw Hats, of course, do not accept this. They tear across the sea and storm the fortress anyway, and it builds to this one incredible moment where Luffy has the flag shot down, the war declaration, and then he shouts at Robin across the whole battlefield to say it, to say out loud that she wants to live, because he's worked out the actual problem. It was never that they couldn't save her, it's that she never believed she was allowed to want to be saved. Nobody in her entire life had ever given her permission to wish for that. And she breaks. She cries out that she wants to live. She wants to keep sailing with them. And that's the moment she stops being a passenger and becomes, properly, one of them. Family. It's one of the best scenes in the whole series. And I will not be taking questions. Now, what if she'd held the line? What if she'd stayed silent, gone quietly to the execution, let herself be erased the way she'd decided was right? On the pure mechanics of it, this is enormous because of what Robin can do. She reads poneglyphs, and the entire back half of the story, the road to the final island, the truth of that lost century, the treasure itself, hinges on being able to read those stones. There's a specific one, the master poneglyph, that ties all the others together, and without someone who can decode them, the crew is essentially sailing toward a destination they cannot navigate to. Robin isn't just a crew member, she's the key to the ending. Lose her at Aina's Lobby, and the Straw Hats keep going, keep growing, keep winning fights, but they're locked out of the one thing the whole voyage is secretly about. They'd reach the door and have no way to open it, but you know by now that the plot's never the bit that gets me. It's the other thing. It's that this whole scenario turns on Robin's belief that she wasn't worth the trouble. And the tragedy of the silent timeline is that she dies with that belief intact. She goes to her execution having concluded one final time that loving her is dangerous, and the safest thing she can do for the people she loves is remove herself. She'd have been wrong. She was so wrong that a crew set the whole world on fire to prove it. But if she never lets them, she never finds out. She just quietly confirms the lie she'd been told her entire life, that she's a burden, a danger, a thing to be gotten rid of, and she carries it out of the world with her. That's what the straw hats actually saved her from. Not the execution really, the belief. They didn't just pull her off the scaffold. They convinced her in the loudest possible way that she'd got herself completely wrong, that wanting to live wasn't selfish, that she was allowed. There's a bittersweet footnote to this arc too, and it fits the mood. This is also the stretch of the story where the crew says goodbye to their first ship, the Going Merry. The little vessel had carried them through everything, and it was finally too broken to sail, and they give it a proper send-off. So it's a chapter about holding on and letting go at the same time, refusing to let go of Robin, learning to let go of the Merry. I've always thought it was clever, putting those two things side by side. Some things you fight the whole world to keep, some things you love enough to release. Growing up is mostly learning to tell which is which. In the timeline where Robin stays silent, the crew loses her and keeps the ship a little longer, maybe, and it's the worst trade by miles. Because a ship can be rebuilt, you can always build another ship. You cannot rebuild the one person on your crew who finally learned, screaming it across a battlefield, that she wanted to be alive. Let's follow the family thread a bit further. Because Luffy had brothers before he had a crew, and one of them we lost to the water before the story even really began. There's a hat floating on the water. Just the hat, drifting on the waves where a small boat used to be, and that image is all anyone got. No body. In this story, a hat on the water usually means somebody's gone. Before Luffy ever had a crew, he had brothers, 2 of them. Ace, older, hot-tempered, fiercely protective, and Sabo, a blonde kid from a noble family who couldn't stand the family he came from. The 3 of them met as children in the roughest part of Goa Kingdom, and one day they stole some sake and shared it in little cups and swore themselves brothers, not by blood, but by choice, which in this story tends to count for more anyway. They had a plan, the 3 of them. Grow up, set out to sea, become pirates, be free. They'd sail at 17. They had it all mapped out, the way kids do. Sabo's the interesting one, because of where he came from. He was born rich, properly rich, noble family, the sort that's supposed to look down on everyone below them. And Sabo hated it. He hated the cruelty of his own class so much that he ran away from a mansion to go live in the dirt with 2 feral orphans because their company was cleaner than his parents. That's a hell of a thing for a kid to work out about the world that early. He decided to set sail before the other 2, got himself a little boat, pushed off, and started out to sea on his own. And then a celestial dragon happened to be passing. I should explain because these people are central to so much of this. The celestial dragons, the world nobles, are the descendants of the families who founded the world government, and they are functionally untouchable. They can do anything to anyone below them, which is everyone, and face no consequence at all. They can shoot a commoner in the street for fun, and the law will side with them. It's one of the ugliest things in the whole world Oda built, and it's meant to be. One of them, sailing into Goa, saw a small boy in a small boat crossing his path, decided this commoner was in his way, and fired on the boat. Just like that, blew it apart and sailed on without a second thought. And Sabo's hat drifted on the water, and the world, including his 2 brothers, believed he was dead. Ace and Luffy grieved him for years. As far as they knew, their brother had been murdered for the crime of existing in front of the wrong man's boat. Except he didn't die. Here's the twist that the story held on to for a very long time. Sabo was pulled out of the water, barely alive, by Monkey D. Dragon, the leader of the Revolutionary Army, the most wanted man in the world, and, in one of those details One Piece loves, Luffy's own father. Sabo survived, but the trauma took his memory. He woke up not knowing who he was, only that he desperately didn't want to be sent back to his parents. So Dragon kept him, and Sabo grew up inside the revolution, rising all the way to become its second in command, its chief of staff, with no memory that he'd ever had two brothers at all. His memory only came crashing back years later, when he heard the news that Ace had died. Imagine that, getting your whole childhood back and losing a brother in the very same moment. So, what if the shot had simply killed him? What if Dragon had been a little further out to sea, arrived a little later, and found nothing but a hat on the water, like everyone else did? The Revolutionary Army loses its number 2 before it ever had him. Sabo grows into one of the most formidable fighters and organisers on the planet, right at Dragon's side, running an underground war against the world government. And without him, that whole operation is weaker, slower, missing its sharpest hand. The revolution that's quietly one of the biggest forces in the story just doesn't have one of its pillars. But the part that actually guts me is what it does to Luffy, and it lands much later. Because in the real timeline, Sabo being alive is a gift the story saves up and gives to Luffy at his lowest point. Luffy loses Ace, we'll get to that, and it's the worst thing that happens to him in the entire series. He's the last of the 3 brothers left, and he's shattered by it. And then, eventually, he learns that Sabo is alive after all, that he didn't lose both of them, that one brother came back from the dead. There's even this lovely bit of continuation to it. Sabo goes on to inherit Ace's devil fruit, the flame power, so that, in a strange way, a piece of Ace lives on, in the brother everyone thought they'd buried first. It's the story handing Luffy back something it took. Kill Sabo as a child, and that gift never comes. Luffy loses Ace, and there's no brother waiting in the wings to soften it. He's just alone, the last one standing, with 2 hats on 2 graves, and the flame that passed to Sabo passes to no one. It just goes out with Ace and stays out. Everything that a living Sabo does for the rest of the story, all of it, comes down to Dragon's boat reaching a patch of water at the right moment instead of the wrong one. A matter of minutes, maybe less. It's a funny thing about this world. It'll take a character away in the cruelest, most meaningless way, a rich man's whim, a boat on the water, and then, sometimes, quietly hand them back to you decades later when you'd stopped hoping. Sabo got both, the murder and the resurrection, and in the timeline where the boat sank for real, he only ever got the first half. Let's step off the sad roads for a bit. The next one's lighter, I promise. It's about a princess and a cruise she very nearly sailed away with. Let's take another little pause. That's 2 brothers we've talked about now, in a way, and a lot of loss, and you've been very patient with all of it. The next few roads are a bit different. One of them is downright gentle, one of them goes all the way back to the beginning of everything, and one of them, right at the end, is the closest thing to a happy ending we've got. So the worst of the heavy stuff is behind us. Settle back in whenever you're ready. There's no hurry at all. Here's my favourite image in the whole Alabasta story. The Straw Hats are leaving. They can't say goodbye properly. I'll explain why. So as their ship pulls away from the shore, they all just raise their left arms into the air without turning around and show the mark. A little X bandaged onto each of their forearms, the same mark Vivi has on hers. And Vivi, standing on the beach with her pet duck, raises her arm back. No words, just the mark. That's the whole goodbye. I think about it constantly. Let me rewind, because this one's lighter than the roads we've been down, and I want to enjoy it. Nefertari Vivi is a princess. The princess of Alabasta, a huge desert kingdom. And when we meet her, she's undercover, infiltrating a criminal organisation because that organisation's boss, a smooth, monstrous man named Crocodile, is secretly engineering a civil war to topple her father's throne and seize the country. So Vivi's spent years alone in disguise trying to save her home. And she's exhausted, and she's in completely over her head. Then she falls in with Luffy's crew, and for the length of the whole Alabasta adventure, she's one of them. Not officially, but she sails with them, fights with them, nearly dies with them, and by the end, they've helped her stop the war and save her kingdom and expose Crocodile for what he is. And then comes the choice, because the crew's moving on, the way they always do, and there's a real question hanging in the air that nobody quite says out loud. Is Vivi coming? She could. They'd have her in a heartbeat. She's proven herself 10 times over. There's a genuine moment where you feel the whole crew silently hoping she'll pick up her bag and step onto the ship. But she's a princess. Her country nearly fell apart, and it needs her, and her father needs her. And she decides with real grief, this is not an easy call for her, that her place is at home, rebuilding. So she stays. And because being publicly known as a friend of the Straw Hat Pirates would paint a target on her and her whole kingdom, they can't even have a tearful public farewell. That's why the goodbye is silent. That's why it's just arms in the air and a matching mark, a promise that whatever the world says about them, they were family, and they'll always be family, and no one needs to say it for it to be true. So, what if she'd chosen the sea instead? What if she'd looked at the ship and looked at the palace and for once in her life picked the thing she wanted over the thing she owed? The lighter, lovelier version of this is just the Straw Hats get a princess. An extra member, right there in the early days, before the crew was even half its final size. Vivi's clever, she's brave, she's a proper diplomat and a skilled fighter, and she rides an enormous duck named Karu, which frankly, the crew was missing. You can picture it so easily, Vivi at the rail, arguing with Nami about money, mothering Luffy, being appalled by Zoro's sense of direction. There's a whole warm alternate story where she's simply there for all of it, one more chair at the table. But this world doesn't hand out free happy endings, and the cost here is a country. Because if Vivi sails away, Alabasta loses its princess right when it's on its knees. Her father's a good king, but he's aging and the kingdom's been gutted by a manufactured war. And Vivi is its future, the person the people trust, the one who bled for them in disguise for years. A kingdom recovering from a near collapse with no heir at home is a fragile thing. Maybe it holds, maybe it doesn't. That's the weight she felt on that beach, and it's why she stayed. And honestly, it's hard to argue she was wrong. There's a sadder layer under this one though, and it only becomes clear much later. Staying royal kept Vivi in the world of kings and thrones, and that world turned out to be far more dangerous than anyone knew. Years after Alabasta, all the world's monarchs gather for a great summit, and Vivi goes, as princesses do, and it goes horribly wrong. Her father is killed there, tangled up in secrets about the true history of the world that powerful people will murder to protect, and Vivi herself ends up hunted, forced to vanish into hiding to survive. Being a princess, the very thing that made her stay behind, is what eventually put her at the centre of something that cost her everything. Which flips the whole what if on its head, doesn't it? Because in the timeline where Vivi runs away to sea, she's not at that summit. She's not a head of state anymore. She's just a pirate on a ship at the far end of the world, gloriously anonymous, sailing past danger her royal self would have walked straight into. The choice that looked like duty, staying home, is the one that led her toward tragedy. And the choice that looked selfish, running off with her friends, might have been the one that kept her safe and whole. I don't think Vivi could have made any other call than the one she made. That's who she is. She was never going to abandon her people to go have adventures. The entire reason the crew loved her was that she'd sacrifice anything for the folks she was responsible for. But there's a version of her out there, arm raised on a different deck, laughing at something stupid Luffy said, who never had to lose her father to a room full of monsters. And when I picture that silent goodbye on the beach, the arms in the air, the little X, part of me wishes she'd just gotten on the boat. Not for the crew's sake, for hers. Anyway, that's the gentle one. Now let's talk about the day a warlord scattered the entire crew to the four winds, and why it was the kindest thing anyone ever did for them. One by one, the bubbles pop. Sabodi Archipelago is this strange place where everything's coated in a film of soap bubbles rising up from the roots of giant trees. And when someone gets taken off the island in a certain way, the last thing you see is a bubble drifting up and bursting. And on the worst day of the crew's early life, that's what Usopp is watching. Bubble after bubble, popping in the sky, each one meaning another one of his friends has just vanished. And he doesn't understand what's happening, and neither do they. And it looks for all the world like the Straw Hats are being wiped out where they stand. Here's how they got there. The crew had reached Sabadi, the last stop before the truly deadly half of the sea, and Luffy did a very Luffy thing. He saw a celestial dragon, one of those untouchable world nobles, casually shoot a friend of his, a fishman named Hachi, for the crime of existing, and Luffy walked up and punched the man in the face, which is, in this world, roughly the most forbidden act imaginable. You do not strike a celestial dragon. The response is total. So the Navy sends an admiral, and I need to explain what that means, because it's the whole problem. The Marines have a top tier of monsters called admirals, and they are simply on a different plane of power from where the crew was at this point. The one who comes is Kizaru, a man who is made of light. He moves at the speed of it, kicks with the force of it, fires beams of it. Fighting him at that stage of their lives wasn't a fight. It was an execution with extra steps. The only reason the crew survived even the first few minutes is that a mysterious old man named Rayleigh, who we later learn was the right hand of the king of the pirates himself, happened to be there and stepped in to hold Kizaru off. And then Kuma arrives. Bartholomew Kuma was one of the 7 warlords, pirates the government keeps on a leash, legal as long as they're useful, and he'd been turned into something half machine and eerily obedient. His devil fruit power lets him repel absolutely anything with a push of his paw-like hands, including people, sending them flying enormous distances across the world. And Kuma goes down the line, and one after another blasts every single straw hat off the island in a different direction. Zoro, gone. Nami, gone. Sanji, Chopper, Robin, all of them, scattered to distant corners of the map. Luffy last, screaming for a crew that's already vanished into the sky. From the outside, it looks like the end of the Straw Hat Pirates. Usopp watches those bubbles pop and thinks his family is being destroyed, and it was the kindest thing anyone ever did for them. Because here's what nobody knew at the time, and what took the story years and years to confirm. Kuma wasn't attacking them. He was saving them. Under all that machinery, some part of the real Kuma was still in there, and he'd made a decision. The crew could not survive Kizaru, that was simple fact. And even if they somehow did, they were nowhere near strong enough for the sea ahead. So he scattered them on purpose, sending each of them to a specific faraway island, where, as it turned out, each one would find exactly the teacher or the trial they needed to grow. Luffy landed where Rayleigh could train him. Zoro landed on the island of the world's greatest swordsman. And so on. All of them. Flung to precisely the right hard place. It was a plan disguised as a massacre. Kuma took the one thing the crew wanted least in that moment, being torn apart, and used it to give them the years of growth that would let them actually survive. That's the time skip. 2 years apart, each of them training in isolation, all of them agreeing to meet back at Sabodi when the time was up stronger. And the entire second half of the series, every version of these characters that goes on to challenge emperors and topple governments, exists because Kuma made that call. So, what if he hadn't? What if Kuma had stayed the obedient weapon the government built and simply stood aside, or worse, followed his orders and helped Kizaru finish the job? What if the crew, refusing to run, had stood their ground and fought the admiral together the way they'd fought everything else together, they die. That's the honest answer, and there's no gentle way around it. Against a foe made of light, with none of the power they'd later earn, standing and fighting isn't brave, it's just the end. Rayleigh could buy them minutes, not a victory. And the horrible irony is that the thing the crew's whole identity is built on, never leaving each other, never scattering, facing everything as one, is the exact thing that gets them killed here. Their greatest strength, their refusal to be separated, becomes the trap. Sometimes, the group that won't split up is the group that goes down together. And you feel the loss ripple outward, quiet and total. No trained Luffy means no one grown strong enough to take on the powers waiting in the new world. No straw hats reuniting later, stronger and surer, means every alliance they later anchor, every kingdom they later free, every emperor they later challenge. None of it happens, because the people who are meant to do it burst like bubbles over Sabadi before they ever came into their power. All of it gone on the day they were too loyal to run. I find Kuma almost unbearably sad, honestly, and this is why. He spent his final scrap of free will saving a crew that hated him for it. They cursed his name for years, absolutely certain he'd tried to destroy them, and he took that because he knew the truth would keep them alive, and their gratitude wouldn't. He'd travelled to all those islands in the first place searching for a cure for his own sick daughter, and somewhere in all that wandering, he'd learned the map well enough to know exactly where each lost kid needed to land. A dying man's knowledge, spent on strangers. He looked at a crew about to be slaughtered and found the one move that looked like cruelty and was actually mercy, and he made it, and he asked for nothing back. So if you ever wonder whether the worst-looking moment of your life might secretly be the thing that saves you, well, ask the Straw Hats about the day they got scattered to the winds. Ask Usopp about the bubbles. Sometimes the paw that knocks you off the island is the only reason you live long enough to find your way back. Now let's go right back to the start, before crews, before dreams, before any of it, to a scaffold in a harbour town, and the last words of a dying man. There's a scaffold in a harbour town called Logetown, and a huge crowd, and a man kneeling on the platform with a grin on his face. This is the single most important moment in the whole history of this world, and it happened a couple of decades before our story even starts. Everything you've heard about tonight, every crew, every dream, every kid who ever looked at the sea and wanted more, traces back to this one man and what he said in the seconds before he died. Goldie Roger was the king of the pirates. He was the one who did what no one thought was possible. He conquered the entire Grand Line, the deadly stretch of sea everyone else broke themselves against, and reached the final island at the very end of it and found whatever's there. He'd seen the truth of the world. He had it all, the wealth, the fame, the title. And then he found out he was dying. Some incurable illness, slow and certain, no cure anywhere. Now here's the choice that made history, and it's a strange one. A man like Roger could have gone out fighting, died at sea, taken a fleet of Marines down with him, become a martyr. Instead, he did something almost gentle. He disbanded his crew, sent all his people home, let them scatter and live, and then he walked into the Navy's hands and turned himself in. He let them arrest the king of the pirates, and there's this quiet, human detail underneath it. While he was waiting to die, he asked an old Marine rival, Garp, to look after his unborn son, so that a baby wouldn't be executed for the crime of who his father was. The most wanted man in the world, spending some of his last thoughts making sure a child he'd never meet would get a chance. The government thought they'd won. They set up a grand public execution, the whole point of which was to terrify everyone out of ever becoming a pirate. Look, they were saying, we caught even him. The dream is over. Give it up. And they raised the blades over the kneeling king. And Roger, with a grin, told the entire watching world that his treasure was real, that he'd left it all in one place and that anyone who wanted it could have it. They'd just have to go and find it. Then the blades fell. It backfired completely. The execution that was meant to end piracy forever did the exact opposite. Roger's last words lit a fire in every restless heart that heard them, and people poured out onto the sea by the thousands, all chasing the greatest treasure ever hidden. They call it the Great Pirate Era. The Age of Dreams, some people say. A whole generation setting sail because one dying man with a sword at his neck chose to grin and dare them to follow. So, what if he hadn't? What if the illness had simply taken him quietly first, in a bed somewhere, at sea, in the dark, with no scaffold, no crowd, no final speech? Or what if he'd decided that the world had been cruel enough to him, and he owed it nothing, and he'd let the dream die with him, instead of handing it to everyone? The Great Pirate Era never begins. And that's not a small change. That's the ground the entire story stands on. Without Roger's dare ringing out across the world, the sea doesn't fill up with dreamers. It just stays quiet and grey and controlled. The government's grip unchallenged. Piracy a scattered nuisance instead of a golden age. And here's the question that unsettles me most. Does Luffy's whole generation even set sail? Because the great rookies, the ones who become legends, they're all children of that era. They grew up in a world that Roger's last words had set on fire, breathing in the idea that the sea was full of possibility, and anyone could reach for it. Take that spark away, and you take away the air they all grew up breathing. Even the man from our very first road tonight, the one who lost an arm for a boy, Shanks was on Roger's crew as a kid. He was there. Buggy too, that clown pirate. The hat itself, the whole straw hat baton we started with, comes down from Roger. So much of what matters was standing on that crew, or in that crowd, or downstream of that moment. Without the execution, without the speech, without the era it created, the dominoes don't just fall differently. Half of them are never set up at all. Whitebeard, the great emperor who becomes so central later, spends his whole life insisting the treasure is real to keep Roger's flame alive. But in this timeline, there's no flame to keep. There's just a rumour about a dead man who might have found something, fading a little more every year until nobody bothers to chase it. The thing I keep turning over is how deliberate it all was. Roger didn't stumble into being the spark. He chose it. He was dying anyway, and he looked at his own death and decided to aim it. He could have hoarded the location of his treasure, or destroyed it, or simply taken the secret to the grave out of spite. Instead, he used his execution, the government's own weapon, the thing designed to crush hope, as a stage to hand hope to everyone. He turned the moment meant to end the dream into the moment that started a million new ones. That's a magic trick of the highest order, and he pulled it off with a blade already falling. There's a lovely symmetry to it too, that only lands once you know how the story rhymes. Roger reached the end of the sea and found the truth and couldn't stay to share it. He was too early, he said. The world wasn't ready. So instead of a destination, he left a direction. He didn't give the world an answer. He gave it a reason to go looking. And a couple of decades later, a rubber kid in a straw hat picks up that same direction without even fully understanding it, and just starts walking toward the end of the world, because a dying man he never met once grinned at a crowd and said the treasure was real. In the timeline where Roger dies quietly, that direction never gets pointed. The end of the sea just sits there, undiscovered, unchased, holding its truth in the dark. And nobody sets out, because nobody ever told them there was anywhere worth going. Let's rest for a moment before the last road. This one's the gentlest place we'll land tonight, and I want you settled for it. One more pause, and then the last road. We've been to a hospital and a dojo, and an orange grove, a fortress and a scaffold, and a beach with two arms raised in the air. You've stayed with me through all of it, which is lovely. This final one is where I'd want to end even if I had 100 more to choose from, because after a whole night of roads that lead somewhere sad, this is the one that leads somewhere kind. Get comfortable. Let's finish gently. Everything comes down to a few seconds and an insult. I need to set the scene, because it's the biggest one in the whole series. There's a war, the Great War, at a marine stronghold called Marineford, and it happened because of the brothers we've already talked about tonight. Ace, Luffy's older brother, had gone hunting a traitor and gotten himself captured, sentenced to public execution. And the whole point of executing Ace was to draw out and destroy the pirates who'd fight for him. It worked. It drew out everyone. Ace's captain, the mighty Whitebeard, brought his entire fleet. Luffy broke into the worst prison in the world and clawed his way to the battlefield. And thousands of people bled and died trying to reach one man on an execution platform. And they do it. Against every impossible odd, they get Ace down. Luffy, running on nothing but love and desperation, reaches his brother and frees him. And for one shining moment, it's actually working. The two of them are fighting side by side, cutting toward the sea and freedom, and you let yourself believe they're going to make it out together. Then Whitebeard calls the retreat. He's going to stay behind and hold the line so everyone else can escape, and the pirates start to fall back. And Ace and Luffy are among them, running for the exit. It's nearly over. They've nearly won. And one of the marine admirals, Akainu, a brutal man made of magma, shouts an insult at Whitebeard's back, calls him a loser, a coward, mocks the man Ace loves like a father, and Ace stops running. That's the whole tragedy, right there. Ace was clear, Ace was free, Ace was seconds from the sea, but he could not let that insult stand, could not bear to hear his captain slandered, and so he turned around to face Akainu instead of running. And Akainu, cold as anything, aimed a killing blow, not at Ace but past him, at Luffy, and Ace threw himself in front of his little brother and took a fist of magma through the chest. He died in Luffy's arms. His last words weren't about revenge or the war or any of it. He just thanked them, his brother, his crew, everyone who'd come, for loving him, for wanting him around. A man who'd spent his whole life quietly unsure whether he even deserved to have been born, and he went out grateful, thanking the people who'd bled for him for the simple fact that they had. It broke Luffy completely. It's the wound that defines him. When Luffy later disappears from the world for those 2 years, it's partly because losing Ace shattered something he had to slowly, painfully rebuild. So, what if he'd kept running? What if, in that half second, someone had grabbed him? Jinbei, the great fishman, who was right there, or Marco, his crewmate, and hauled him toward the sea before the insult could hook him? Or what if Ace, just once, had let the words wash past him and kept his eyes on the exit and his little brother's hand? He lives. Say it slowly, because it's the sweetest thing we've imagined all night. Ace lives. He and Luffy make it to the water and out to open sea with the retreating fleet, both of them battered and bleeding and alive. The war still costs a fortune in lives. Whitebeard still likely makes his last stand. The sea still changes shape afterward, but the two brothers get out. And everything downstream of Ace's death simply doesn't happen. Luffy isn't shattered in the specific, total way that his brother dying in his arms shattered him. The wound that defined the back half of his story was never carved. And think about the brothers, because that's the real gift. We spent an earlier road tonight mourning Sabo, the brother lost to the water as a child, and how in the real story, Luffy's left as the last one standing. But here's the thing, in the true timeline, Sabo turns out to be alive after all. So picture the version where Ace lives too. All three of them, out there in the world at the same time, the way they swore they'd be as kids sharing sake in the dirt. 3 brothers who all made it. Ace and Luffy sailing their own seas, crossing paths now and then to cause trouble and check in. Sabo turning up out of nowhere the way he does. The little pacts they made under a tree as children, that one of them would be free, all of them keeping it at once. Ace never got to see who his little brother became. That's the part that quietly wrecks me. He died back when Luffy was still a rookie. Still finding his feet, Years before Luffy grew into the man the whole world would come to know. Ace never got to watch him rise, never got to see him stand among the great names of the sea. In the timeline where Ace ducks the insult and lives, he gets all of it. He gets to watch his reckless little brother become someone and be insufferably proud of him and pretend he isn't. He gets years, just years, the most ordinary, precious thing. There's a chain of causes behind all this that's worth naming because it shows how many small hinges the tragedy swung on. Ace was only at that execution because he'd chased a traitor. Against his captain's explicit wishes, Whitebeard told him to let it go. And Ace, out of pride and duty, went anyway, and it got him captured. So there's a whole earlier road where Ace simply listens to the old man, lets the traitor go, and never ends up on that platform at all. The war never happens. Nobody has to reach him. He and Luffy grow old, having never spent a single day apart on a battlefield. So many places where a different small choice sends everyone home safe. And the story chose the one path where none of them do. But I don't want to end on the machinery of it, because that's not what this one's about. This one's about the simplest wish there is. That the brother who threw himself in front of a killing blow, who died thanking everyone for loving him, could have just lived, could have kept running, could have heard that insult and for once let it go, and made it to the water and grown old. I like to picture it somewhere quiet, years on, long after all the wars, three brothers somewhere they're not supposed to be, sitting around, not saying much, because they never needed to. The way people are when everything that matters has already been settled between them. Sabo turning up late as usual, Ace with grey coming into his hair, teasing Luffy about something from when they were kids. Nobody in danger, nobody about to lose anyone. Just three people who swore an oath under a tree a long time ago, and against every odd this cruel world could throw at them, got to keep it. That's the road I'd choose, if I got to choose. It's out there somewhere, just off the edge of the real story, like all the others. A world where Ace heard the insult and kept walking, where the brothers all made it home. They swore as kids that one of them would be free. On this last road they all are, free and alive and together. That's the one I'd keep. Since we've been sitting with Ace, let's linger a bit longer on the man who set the whole thing rolling, because it's a quieter, stranger story than most people remember. And it's got a what-if buried inside it too. The traitor's name was Marshall D. Teach, though the world would come to know him as Blackbeard. And the thing about Teach is that he was patient in a way that's genuinely chilling. He'd read decades earlier about a particular devil fruit, the Yami Yami no Mi, the darkness power, said to be the most dangerous of them all, and he decided he had to have it. Not wanted, had to, so he did something almost unimaginably long game about it. He joined Whitebeard's crew and simply waited. For years, decades even. Because Whitebeard's ship had a rule, whoever finds a devil fruit gets to eat it. And Teach reckoned that of all the places in the world, a crew that famous sailing that widely gave him the best odds of one day, laying eyes on the fruit he'd been hunting his whole life. So he blended in, laughed at the jokes, played the loyal crewmate for the better part of a lifetime. All of it a disguise stretched over a single, fixed want. And here's the small terrible hinge. It wasn't Teach who found the fruit. It was a man named Thatch, the 4th Division commander, by all accounts one of the warmest, most well-liked people on the whole ship, the sort who was the first to make friends with newcomers. Thatch found the Yami Yami no Mi on a ride, and by the crew's own rule, it was his to eat. He just didn't straight away. Held on to it. That was the moment Teach's decades of patience curdled. He looked at the thing he'd waited his entire life for, sitting in the hands of a friend, and he murdered that friend to take it. Broke the one iron law of the ship, you do not kill your brothers, and then vanished into the night with the fruit, and became Blackbeard. Now sit with the what if in that, because it's a small one, and it changes everything. What if Thatch had just eaten the fruit the day he found it? It was his by right. If he'd swallowed it on the spot, there'd have been nothing for Teach to kill him for. the prize would already be gone, absorbed, out of reach. Thatch lives. Teach's decades of waiting come to nothing, and this patient, dangerous man is left with a choice. Stay a nobody on the crew forever, or leave empty-handed. Either way, the darkness power never lands in the worst possible hands. And then follow it gently, the way we've been following everything tonight. Because Teach getting that fruit is the first domino in the whole Marineford catastrophe. It's the murder of Thatch that sends Ace after him in the first place. Ace was Teach's own division commander, and in this world that made Teach's crimes Ace's responsibility to answer for. So Ace went hunting him, out of duty and grief and pride, even though Whitebeard told him plainly to let it go. The old man knew. Whitebeard looked at his hot-headed son and said in so many words, "Don't chase this man, it'll cost you more than you know." And Ace, being Ace, went anyway. Found Teach, lost, got captured, and that capture is the thread that pulls the entire war into being. The execution, the fleet, Luffy's desperate charge, all of it. So there's a whole other road tucked inside the one we already walked. Not just, what if Ace escaped the war, but what if there was never a war to escape? What if Thatch ate the fruit and lived, and Teach never became Blackbeard, and Ace never had a traitor to chase, and the old man's warning never had to be ignored? In that timeline, nobody storms Marineford, because there's no Ace on a platform to storm it for. He's just off sailing somewhere, alive and well, causing his usual trouble, blissfully unaware of the war that never came for him. It's wild when you lay it out, how much horror flowed from one friendly man deciding to hold on to a piece of fruit a little too long. Not out of greed, not out of any fault at all. Thatch didn't do a single thing wrong. He found something that was his and he didn't rush to use it, which is the most human, harmless thing in the world. And a man who'd been waiting decades in the dark took that ordinary pause as his opening. Sometimes the hinge the whole story swings on isn't a grand betrayal or a heroic sacrifice. Sometimes it's just a good person, holding a piece of fruit, one evening, not knowing what it would cost. I don't say that to make it sadder than it needs to be at this hour. I say it because it's the same lesson every road tonight keeps quietly teaching. The enormous things grow out of the small ones. A held fruit, a missed boat, a staircase, an insult heard at exactly the wrong moment. Let's end our wanderings somewhere warmer though, because I don't want to leave you on a murdered cook and a stolen fruit. Let's go back to Kuma and those popping bubbles for a moment and talk about the good that came out of it, the part that always makes me smile. When Kuma scattered the crew, he didn't fling them at random. We touched on that earlier, but it's worth sitting in, because the destinations are lovely once you know them. Each straw hat landed somewhere that turned out to be exactly the crucible they needed. Luffy was sent to Rayleigh, the old first mate of the king of the pirates himself, who spent that stretch teaching him the deeper arts of this world, the willpower techniques that separate the great from the merely strong. Zoro landed, of all places, on the gloomy island home of the greatest swordsman alive, the one man who'd already beaten him, and spent those long months begging that man to train him. The swordsman who once humbled him became the teacher who forged him. There's a kind of poetry to that I never get tired of, and it goes on down the crew, each of them dropped somewhere strange and hard and perfectly chosen, each of them growing in isolation into the person the sea ahead would demand. They didn't know the others were doing the same. For all any of them knew, they were alone in the world, their family gone. But they'd made a quiet agreement, meet back where it all fell apart, when the time was up, stronger, and they held to it. Every one of them, scattered across the entire world, spent those months clawing their way toward being worthy of standing beside the others again. And there's one more detail that ties it all back to that dying man and his sick daughter. The reason Kuma knew where to send each of them, how he had this uncanny map of exactly the right island for exactly the right person, is that he'd already been to most of those places himself, years earlier. searching desperately for a cure for his own child's illness. All that wandering, all that grief, all those islands memorized by a father trying to save his daughter. It became later the knowledge he used to save someone else's family instead. His pain became their map. I find that almost unbearably tender. A man's worst years spent looking for a cure he never found, quietly repurposed into the thing that scattered a doomed crew to safety and gave them back to each other, alive. So when I think about the road where Kuma doesn't do it, where the bubbles never pop and the crew stands and dies together, the thing I mourn most isn't just the crew. It's that Kuma's suffering would have meant nothing. In the real timeline, all that wandering pain got turned, at the very end of his free will, into something that saved people. Take the scattering away, and his years of searching just stay what they were. A father's failure, private and unredeemed. The story let him turn it into a gift. That's the version I'm grateful for, popped bubbles and all. And that's the thing about Kuma I keep circling back to. He took the worst years of his life and quietly turned them into the reason a doomed crew got to live. He didn't have to. He just did. While we're on the subject of mercy, because it keeps coming up tonight, doesn't it? Let's go back to Robin for a moment. To the island she came from, because there's a detail in that story I couldn't fit in earlier. And it's one of the gentlest things in the whole saga. O'Hara, her home, was an island of scholars. Not warriors, not pirates, historians, people whose entire crime was wanting to understand the past. And when the world's rulers decided that knowledge was too dangerous to allow, they came to erase the island completely. We talked about that. What I didn't tell you is how a little girl got out. There was a giant named Jaguar D. Saul, an enormous, laughing, kind-hearted man, a marine who'd washed up on O'Hara and befriended young Robin. Taught her to laugh, of all things, in a childhood that hadn't given her much reason to. And when the destruction came, Saul turned on his own people to save her. He carried her toward the shore, got her a boat, did everything a person could do to give one child a chance. He was a soldier who looked at an order to kill a little girl and simply refused. And he wasn't the only one. There was another Marine there that day, a cold-seeming officer named Kusan, who by every rule and order should have stopped Robin from escaping. He was more than capable of it. And instead, quietly, for reasons he barely explained even to himself, he let her go. He looked at a terrified child fleeing across the water, a child the entire world government wanted erased, and he decided, against his orders and his own side, to look the other way. A small mercy handed to a girl who wouldn't understand its full weight for decades. It's the kind of quiet decision that reshapes a whole life. Robin lived because two men, on the worst day her home ever saw, each decided a child's life was worth more than an order. For most of the story, Robin believed Saul had died getting her off that island, carried it as one more grief in a life stacked with them, one more person who'd loved her and paid for it. That was the weight she nearly let herself be executed under. Years later, the belief that everyone who cared for her ended up dead because of it. And then, much later still, the story does something lovely. It reveals that Saul survived, that the giant who'd laughed her through her childhood and thrown his life away to save her hadn't actually died at all. He'd made it, all those years ago, and even managed to save the island's precious library in the bargain, hiding the scholar's life's work where it could survive. Some fans grumbled that it softened her tragedy, and maybe it did. But I think there's something right about it. Robin spent her whole life certain that loving her was a death sentence, learning that the person she thought she'd killed by being loved had actually lived, had been out there, alive all along. Is the universe finally telling her the lesson she'd learned was wrong? That caring for her didn't have to end in a grave, that she'd been allowed to be loved the whole time. So in the timeline where she stays silent on that scaffold and lets herself go, that's the cruelest part of all. She'd never lived to find out. She'd die still believing Saul died for her, still certain her love was poison, when the truth waiting further down the road was that the big laughing giant made it, and the mercy those two men showed her wasn't wasted after all. It's a good thing to know at this hour, that the kindness people spent on you when you were small and frightened tends to have lived longer than you feared. I've got one more for you before we settle, and it's a soft one, so it's a good place to be drifting off. There's a reindeer named Chopper, and he had the loneliest start of anyone in the whole crew, which is saying something given the company. He was born with a blue nose. That's it, that's the original sin, slightly odd colour, and it was enough for his own herd to shun him. Then he found and ate a devil fruit, the human fruit, which let him walk and talk and think like a person. And instead of fixing his loneliness, that made it worse, because now he was too human for the reindeer and too strange for the humans, a creature that belonged to neither world. When people first saw him standing upright and talking, they didn't see a miracle. They saw a monster, and they hurt him for it. So he spent his early life wandering a frozen island, completely alone, rejected by absolutely everyone, which is about the bleakest thing I can imagine. And then there was Dr. Hiluluk. Now Hiluluk was a terrible doctor. I say that with love. He was a former thief and a genuine quack whose treatments tended to make people sicker. And he knew it, and he carried on anyway, because Hiluluk believed something that no amount of failure could shake out of him, that there was no illness in the world that couldn't be cured. He believed it because he thought he'd been cured himself once, dying, then stumbling on a grove of cherry blossoms in some far country and feeling his sickness lift at the sheer beauty of it. Probably nonsense medically, but he built his whole life on it. And when he crossed paths with a badly injured reindeer that everyone else had written off as a monster, Hiluluk didn't see a monster either. He saw someone worth saving. He took Chopper in, patched him up, gave him a name, and became the first living thing that ever showed the little reindeer any kindness at all. They had a few good years, this quack and his outcast son, and it doesn't last, because this is one piece, and the warmest stories carry the sharpest knives. Hiluluk was secretly dying of a real illness, and Chopper, desperate to save the one person who'd ever loved him, went and fetched a mushroom he'd read could cure anything. Except Chopper misread the book. The little skull symbol he thought meant miracle cure actually meant poison. He fed his father a lethal mushroom by accident, trying to save his life, and Hiluluk, when he realised what had happened, ate the soup anyway, drank it down because it came from the boy, and he wasn't about to let Chopper watch him refuse it. Then, so that Chopper would never have to believe he'd killed the man who saved him, Hiluluk went off and ended his own life on his own terms, insisting to the last that a person doesn't really die as long as someone remembers what they stood for. Chopper went to the island's only other doctor, a fierce old woman named Kureha, waving Hiluluk's flag and sobbing, and swore he'd become a doctor who could cure anything. Hiluluk's exact impossible belief passed straight down. Kureha took him in and taught him real medicine for years, and there's a coda I can never quite get through cleanly. Hiluluk's daft lifelong dream had been to make cherry blossoms bloom over the snow of that frozen island, to heal the whole kingdom's frozen heart. He never managed it. But years after his death, his research finally worked, and the blossoms came, pink petals falling over all that white, exactly as he'd promised, just too late for him to see. A quack's impossible dream, coming true over his own grave. So, what if Hiluluk had walked past? What if he'd seen the injured monster in the snow and decided sensibly that a talking reindeer was more trouble than it was worth, and kept moving? Chopper never learns kindness. That's the whole of it, and it's enough. The little reindeer, who was rejected by every world he tried to belong to, would have had that final rejection confirmed by the one person who might have taken him in, and he'd have grown up, if he grew up at all, certain that he really was the monster everyone said he was. No medicine, no dream of curing the incurable, no warmth to carry. And when Luffy's crew later turns up on that island needing a doctor, there's no gentle, brilliant, big-hearted reindeer waiting to become one of them. Just an empty stretch of snow where a lonely creature used to wander, believing the worst thing anyone ever told him about himself. And Hiluluk's belief dies with Hiluluk. That's the quieter loss. Because the whole point of that daft, failing doctor was that he refused to accept that anything was hopeless. Not a disease, not a frozen kingdom, not a monster in the snow. He poured that belief into Chopper, and Chopper carried it out into the world and made it real, over and over, patching up a crew that throws itself into danger for a living. Take Hiluluk out, and that stubborn, beautiful refusal to give up on anyone never finds a vessel to survive in. It just melts, unremembered, like his cherry blossoms that never bloomed. I love that the softest member of the crew came from the coldest, cruelest start, and that the thing that turned it around wasn't power or destiny, but just a bad doctor with a good heart deciding a lonely creature was worth keeping. That's the whole trick of it, really. Someone looked at the one everybody else called a monster and simply chose not to, and out of that one choice came a healer. Right, that's the last road. Let's bring it home. We've been down 10 of these tonight, and a few more besides. 10 glimpses of a One Piece that almost was. There was the arm Shanks gave up in the shallows, and the staircase that took a girl who might have been the greatest swordsman alive. There was the orange grove, and a mother who chose to die rather than call her own daughters strangers. The clumsy spy who wept in the dark over a dying boy, and the crew that took on the entire world so one woman would let herself be saved. A brother lost to the water and a rich man's boredom. A princess on a beach with her arm in the air, saying goodbye the only way she was allowed to. A warlord who tore a crew apart to keep them breathing, and a dying king who grinned at his own execution and lit a fire that never went out. And, in one kinder version of things, a brother who heard the insult and simply kept walking. None of these roads are better than the one we actually got. That's not really the point of them. The story we have is the story we have, and it earned every bit of its joy and its grief. The point is smaller and quieter than that. It's just that none of those little moments were small. A held fruit, a missed boat, a glare aimed at a sea monster, a hand that reached out or didn't. The whole enormous story rests on a few of them, and the people living through them almost never knew, right then, that they were deciding everything. I think that's why I love this stuff at 1 a.m. Not because the sad timelines are worth wishing for, most of them aren't, but because they remind you how much the small kindnesses held up. Shanks laughing about his arm, Bellmare altering a dress, Korra-san crying so the boy wouldn't see, a marine looking the other way, Kuma turning his worst years into someone else's map home. The whole saga, when you tip it on its side, is really just a long story about people choosing over and over to be a little kinder than the moment required. And every time they did, a road opened that led somewhere worth living. Those other versions are still out there, if you ever fancy a visit, drifting somewhere just off the edge of the real story, patient as ever. A boat that never sank, a staircase that held, a brother who kept running toward the sea. You can almost see them if you let your eyes go soft. They don't ask anything of you. They'll just keep drifting there, quiet and unhurried, for whenever you feel like wandering back. However late it is where you are, I hope you're warm and settled, and I hope whatever you drift toward tonight is a gentle one. Thanks for wandering out to all these might-have-beens with me. Sleep well. The sea's still out there in the dark, and so is the treasure, and so is every version of the story that never got told, and they'll all keep till morning.